We need to stop comparing the prices of vehicles today with the prices of vehicles in the past by applying an inflation rate. It turns out that we're all lying to ourselves, that the price of some of our vehicles are dramatically outpacing inflation, and the fact is that it's actually our fault. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and if you've ever been here, you know I love to wax poetically about the vehicles of the 80s and the 90s and how you could buy a Dodge Neon for $12,500 or maybe a Stratus for $15,000, something like that. And whenever I make these kind of comments in my videos, I usually get a comment, at least one, that says, yeah, but if you take that price and apply an inflation rate to it, this is what that car would be today, which is typically not too far off from where we see vehicles. But increasingly, that's been sounding a little off to me. And specifically, when you think about like the Ford Maverick, people look at smaller trucks and say, yeah, but you apply an inflation rate and all of a sudden it's $27,000, $28,000. Well, the Colorado and the Ranger and the Nissan and the Toyota are all $30-some-odd-thousand trucks. The Maverick started at $19,995 just a few years ago. Of course, now it's about a $27,000 or $28,000 truck, because Ford is profiteering off of their popularity. But I decided I needed to start digging a little bit deeper, and what I found was a little surprising. And so the first thing to do is to actually look at the inflation rate. We're going to look at the Consumer Price Index, of which transportation is a portion of it, and new car sales are an even smaller portion, all weighted into it. The CPI, the inflation rate, is an average, so some items in our society like healthcare and higher education are much higher than the inflation rate, but some are much, much lower, like the prices for flat screen TVs. And so going to a basic inflation calculator, if we'd had $1 in 1990, I'm going to start with 1990, and in 2025 it would be worth $2.46. So we can say, looking at 1990 prices to today, it's a 2.46 multiplier on those prices. So why don't we start looking at cars and comparing it through inflation with what that car would be today? Now, methodology, I can't compare equipment one-to-one. So all I'm doing is I'm taking the base level versus the base price, the base level price in 2025 to compare. And I started with the Toyota Corolla. So in 1990, a Toyota Corolla's base price was $9,218. So if we apply that 2.46% multiplier, today it would be a $22,672. If we go over to the Toyota website and pull up the Corolla, their starting MSRP is $22,325. That means that the Corolla is actually $300 less than if you applied an inflation rate to a base Corolla in the past. Now, I'm going to head off one comment here. I know, you can't possibly compare a base level Corolla today with a base level Corolla of 1990, and that's absolutely true. The cars today are much heavier, more powerful, much safer, and of course, much better equipped. Backup camera wasn't even an option on a Corolla back in the 1990s, much less being standard equipment today. So I'm just looking at the prices. I recognize the modern cars are much safer and typically much better equipped, but we have to start somewhere, right? So next I decided, let's look at the Honda Accord, keep it in the car family. So a 1990 Honda Accord DX starts at $12,345. Again, adding a 2.6 multiplier to it means that a base level would be $30,369. Today, the Accord starts at $28,295, nearly $2,000 less than what inflation would tell us. So right off the bat, we can look at manufacturers and say they have done an amazing job improving their efficiency and making the cars, by inflation, much less expensive, or at least slightly less expensive, while being much better equipped than they used to be. And I'll leave the leave the argument for whether they're more reliable or not up to others. That's outside the point here today. The point is that the car market is tracking inflation and actually doing better. So where's the disconnect? Well, obviously it comes from the popularity of trucks. See, if you look back at 1990, the average price of a new car sold was $15,042. The average price of a new car in December of 2024 was $49,740. That is a 3.31 multiplier versus the 2.46 that inflation would give us. Trucks are dramatically outpacing inflation, or more specifically, the overall market is dramatically outpacing inflation. So I decided to dig into this just a little bit more. Let's look at a Chevy CK1500, the predecessor of the Silverado, a 1990 base level, started at $10,995. A Silverado today, the most basic one you can buy at the Chevy website, $37,000. Taking that, it's a 2.46 maximum. It should be $27,000. So if you look at just inflation, a base CK1500 today as a Silverado should be about $27,000. It's actually $10,000 more than that. That's a 3.36 multiplier. Another way to put this is a base Silverado should be the price of a Maverick, but it's not. Now I decided to do one more example here, and that is to look at one of my favorite cars from my youth, the Jeep Wrangler. In 1990, a Wrangler S was $9,843, base level. If we apply 2.46 multiplier on it from our inflation rate, it should be $24,000 and some change. But a two-door Sport in 2025 is $32,000, over that, $32,700, over $8,000 over inflation. And you can't tell me the modern Jeep is better. So let's look at one more. And I'm going to do the Ford Explorer. It's one of the most popular SUVs of all time. In 1991, which is the only data I could find here, it was $14,926, so about $15,000. If you put a 2.46 multiplier on that, it should be $36,718. And to my surprise, the 2025 Explorer starts at $40,000. Well, $40,050. So it's 2.68 multiplier. It's still better than the trucks, but it's slightly outpacing inflation. I'll be honest, I thought that was going to be a lot larger because sport utilities are so popular, but I stopped there. I didn't want to start looking at the Chevys and the Toyotas and everybody else. No need to do that. It's obvious here. The picture is cars are not the problem. Cars are the problem because so few manufacturers are actually selling them. If you want a car today, your choices are Honda, Toyota, Nissan, Volkswagen, and, well, I guess Mitsubishi has one too. If you want an SUV and a truck, they've exploded, but prices have gone up from there. It's our desires for SUVs and trucks that are driving this inflation rate. Manufacturers are actually doing a great job keeping the prices down, even though $24,000 or $28,000 sounds very expensive to me. By inflation, the price of cars are actually a much better deal than they were even 35 years ago. Buyers want SUVs and trucks, and manufacturers are giving buyers what they demand and what they're going to buy. Any basic economics course will tell you that it is a supply and demand curve, and if demand goes up, prices will rise as well. And over time, over 35 years, we've had incrementally increasing demand for SUVs and trucks and incrementally increasing prices on these SUVs and trucks, which are outstripping inflation. Now, fully 60 to 80% of our market is bluntly overpriced. And Americans are paying that price on a monthly basis with, in the first quarter of 2025, the average car payment, the average new car payment was $745. So how do Americans manage to afford all of this? How do they manage to keep selling all these big trucks and all these SUVs that are outpacing inflation and nobody seems to care? It's because of creative financing. Now, there's a portion of the market that does do leasing, but consider that in 1990, the average length of a new car loan was just 52 months. All right, 4.5 years. The average new car loan in 2024 was 68 months. So what's the solution? Well, it's not easy. The fact is that we as individuals and we as buyers have to acknowledge our own fault. It is our desire for the SUVs and for the trucks, regardless of what the price is, we'll just extend the payments a little bit longer that are allowing manufacturers to charge basically whatever they feel like. But we can't disagree. Again, I want to stress this, that the modern cars, I won't argue that they're more rugged and they're more durable, they're more reliable than cars of the past. But it's hard to argue that they're not better equipped overall. And that equipment costs money. But for the cars, they've managed to take the Toyota, the Corolla or the Camry, for example. They've managed to continually build a great car while increasing the equipment level, but keeping the price down. But for trucks, it's absolutely exceeding by $8,000 or $10,000 what inflation would tell us it should be. Millions of auto buyers right now are truck poor. And I know it's easy to blame the manufacturers for pushing this out on people, but they decide to buy it. And it's time for a lot of us as buyers to look in the mirror and say, we're responsible for these prices exceeding the inflation rate. People are buying based on prestige, image, or their ego, and together we could save billions of dollars if we just looked hard at the options and what actually fits our life, which is typically smaller, less expensive, sometimes more reliable, like a sedan, a wagon, or a minivan. But the problem is anybody actually listening when you can just get an 84-month loan? Thanks so much for being here, my friends. I appreciate you spending a few minutes with me. Let me know your thoughts below.